afternoon and welcome to Brave Embrace. This is a warm place to gather where we talk about compelling stories of courage found in the darkness of difficult moments. I am really honored today to share with you a very special guest. This is Human Trafficking Awareness and Prevention Month, and I am lucky enough to have someone join me today to talk about being brave that has worked in the landscape of this important effort for years, coming out of a massive corporate career, bringing all of that intelligence into founding and sorting and strategizing some of the country's most important efforts. Please welcome me in joining my friend Melinda Metz. Hi, Melinda.
Hi, Kim. Thank you for having me. I'm so pleased to be here. I think that we're going to unpack some really beautiful content today that people will find inspirational and moving and mindful and provocative.
Oh, I have no doubt. I have been so pleased to see you speak a number of times and share in journeys that you have been a part of. And one of the things that I love about your personal mission is that you are about creating change in the world, and you have done that at the state, local, and national level. But one of my very favorite things is that you have really worked hard to get down and understand the complex issues that survivors face, because you yourself have been through a variety of life challenges that you have chosen to overcome by finding your brave.
Yes, I have found my brave, and I have found quite a bit of healing in my brave and resilience in my brave. And I am so well pleased to say today I am a brave human being. That doesn't mean that I don't have fear. You can't be fearless without fear. And fear is not the opposite of brave. It's actually a component to it. So, but yeah, my personal background is I come from a family who had generational dysfunction. And there was, a lot of emotional neglect and physical abuse. Not a lot of physical abuse, but that doesn't take away from the fact that the physical abuse was there. And, I was not built into a resilient young woman when I left my home. But I had resiliency, otherwise I wouldn't have made it. So I, living through that, and for many years, not understanding why I was making the decisions I was making, I didn't realize, just how deep the impact of the trauma that I had lived through had on me and those decisions that I made. So I entered therapy when I was in my mid-20s, which is really quite early, for people. And I recognized that there was something that was internally driving me to not make good decisions, And I got into therapy and I started unpacking that. And, what I found was a trauma. People that are familiar with Melody Beatty and other masters of codependency understand what I'll say when I said, I walked out of my family the lost child. I was the lost child. And the lost child is typically the one that is the most emotionally impacted. And, I was a very insightful child, and I could see things that most children, or I can't say that, I haven't spoken to a lot of children, but I knew that something was not okay. And I laugh and I say, I came out of the womb a truth teller and a truth seeker, which made me a challenge for my family. And I'm not saying that I was always the good girl, but so I got into my 20s and had a string of terrible relationships, and and I just wasn't happy. And then I just really dug into my healing, and I got enough healing and enough stability that I met and married a very wonderful man, which has been a huge component of my healing as well. So I was being prepared, and I didn't know it, to work in human trafficking. My older sister was trafficked, and it was well before that term was ever coined. So, there were some very colorful descriptors to when talking about her, and I'm not going to dishonor her by using those things, But when I learned the term domestic sex trafficking, her life framed up in front of me. And that's where my life, and that was 10 years ago, and that's where my life took a change. And I have dedicated these last 7, 8, 9, 10 years really to digging in and continue my healing, which has positioned me to be a pretty decent advocate and ally for survivors.
Yeah, being an ally is something that advocates and those working in the field sometimes forget that they're supposed to be, is understanding and as you so eloquently said, reframing it in a way, framing it actually, not reframing it, but framing it in a format that made sense with the traumas that had been experienced in childhood and youth. And again, I know that there were some beautiful things about family and life growing up as well. So many of us that have suffered abuses, it's that dichotomy of the things that were good, but then the things that were bad, and trying to weave those together. And your choice to engage in and enter in help for yourself is such a strength and such a step to brave. I want to ask a question. I love the way you explained that fear is not necessarily the opposite, or the not involved in being courageous or brave. It's part of the process. So without some of that fear and loss and hurt, do you think that brave and courage and becoming who you are now could have existed the way that it does?
I don't really know how to answer that. I think that it took me a long time, Kim, to realize that having fear was part of being fearless, and being fearless is part of being brave. So those three components are very wrapped together. And you said something that really sparked me, that we sit on, people who experience trauma and complex trauma sit on a spectrum from, small trauma to unspeakable trauma. So when it comes to bravery, I think fear is a component of it. And it's putting it into the perspective, figuring out what fear really is, because there's so many definitions to it, and our culture is not okay with being afraid, even though our culture is very afraid. So it is, for me at least, it is realizing that fear is a very, very important component to me being who I am today.
Oh, so it has fed and it has fertilized in a way the efforts of what you've brought to the world today and how you show up. And thank you for sharing that so vulnerably, because I think that all of us as survivors and those that have been hurt, we sometimes feel like, why me? Why us? What would life had been like otherwise? But when we can look at that pain as fertilizer,
yes,
it transforms. Yeah. So in 2019 and 2020, the years that were hard, and in 2020, as we said goodbye to it, I have felt like it definitely didn't happen to us. Maybe it happened for us. And I know during that time, you have been incubating a phenomenal new project called Alive, which is part of who you are and how you're showing up today, but the Alliance of Leadership and Innovation for Victims of Sex Trafficking. And I just want to share with our listeners and those watching that the fear and the hurt that we've talked about has fed into this phenomenal response. So we're going to kind of go back and forth in time, if you don't mind, as we reflect back and talk future, because I think the stepping stone and the way we go back and forth between it is where the richness occurs. So tell me, how did this happen in 2020 when things were so crazy in the world?
Yeah, well, the organization, we call it Alive, and it's the Alliance of Leadership and Innovation for Victims of Exploitation.
Mm.
And in September of 2019, I answered a Facebook message in an ally Facebook room group. And I could tell that somebody needed some help with something. And I'm like, let's see what this is. And the next thing I knew, I was on my way to California. And I was working with a conference called FatherCon, which is really addresses distracted fathers, be it that, if they're not in the home with their children.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I've lost a little audio, Melinda, so I'll let you work on that quickly with our production team. I'm going to share with those watching and talk a little bit about the efforts that brought you here, talking about the time that you spent with the landing in Houston, the time that you have poured into understanding victims and the challenges that they face, so that in your work with them, you were able to meet them where they were and get right into it. It's phenomenal. And over the last few months of 2020 and into 2021, working to formulate the knowledge behind what would become Alive. And that would be the research and the knowledge of understanding the dichotomy and the lacks in service for African American and Black women and children around the trafficking area. So you have identified this gap. You have identified the intersection between these. And I'm looking forward, as your audio is coming back online, to hear a little bit more about that. It's been phenomenal seeing the transition from tragedy to triumph. And as I have shared, on a personal level, the work that we have to do sometimes takes us outside of our comfort zones. And for those watching that have faced tragedies of their own, I think that you heard Melinda say, taking that fear and the pain from that and pouring it into something is like planting it in a garden, so that rather than burying that part of ourselves, we're actually planting it to feed it and fertilize it into something that can bring good back into the world. And that's what I have watched my friend Melinda Metz do for so long, in so many ways, of understanding the crises that are there, and the gaps and the intersections. So am I hearing any audio from Melinda? Not yet, but we are going to have her back today, and additionally as well. There's so many rich pieces of information that she can share with us. So I want to go briefly to the concept again of the ABC model that I spoke about a couple of episodes back. This model is a way to take and utilize the adversities that we face, take a look at them, and then decide how we want the consequences to play out. So, for example, the adversity of the political culture right now and how that has affected relationships, how that has affected our home life, our stress levels, our mental well-being. And when we look at the adversities, I have found that it's our belief around what that adversity means to us personally, how it goes against and challenges our core values and what we believe as human beings. And so it's the belief around the adversity that then equals the consequence. So you can see your neighbor, for example, finding themselves wanting to be very outward and show negative emotion because their belief around the adversity that's happening perhaps is something that they feel threatened by in the safety of their world or what life looks like. So if we're looking at abuses or losses that have occurred, when we take that adversity and we challenge our beliefs around it, we look at, is my belief that this is a pain for me, a loss for me, something I can learn from, something I can grow from? then we're able to allow the way it affects our life. We are in more control of that consequence of how it plays out in our daily life. So that ABC model, looking at the adversities, looking at our beliefs around the adversity, and then seeing how that changes the consequences is a tool and a takeaway that we can use. And I'm glad we have Melinda back. And I just want to let her know that I introduced a little bit more about her research that led to Alive and kind of some of the gaps and intersections that she was finding in lack of services for Black communities. Yes. So we're going to go back to Melinda, founder and board president of Alive. And when we last lost your audio, you were sharing about how that was birthed.
Oh, yeah. So right quickly, it was a Facebook post, and I hopped on an airplane, and the night before 2 nights before I left, this girlfriend called me up and said, "Hey, do you think you're going to California to learn something about human trafficking to bring back to Houston?" I'm like, no. I'm moving into creative prevention, Okay. And the next day I connected with a man named Ken Henry, and he was moving to Houston, and I'm like, oh no, maybe my friend's right. So when I got out there, even though the vehicle was to work on this conference, it was actually to meet these 3 mighty African-American Black men that work in Houston, in mentoring and human trafficking. One's in Dallas and the other in LA County. And I was standing across the conference facility, and I was looking at them, and I just had this knowing that there they are. So I didn't know what to do with that, honestly, because I had been studying, the statistics, and I don't even want to quote statistics because, they're just so hard to quantify, but there is a tremendous number of reported human trafficking cases that are African-American women and girls. And then I started looking at trafficking numbers altogether, and they're not going down. And I'm like, well, it's because the Black community is not being looked at and being responded to in human trafficking, given, and we need to do something about that. And so it was one of those missional piercing moments for me. And that happened before the trip to California. And then I came back and I assembled, asked some of my Black ally friends to come together. And I said, I don't know why I'm having you together, but I'm going to tell you this story. And it was an incredible resonance. And then I was invited to a coalition meeting of a coalition that I had used to belong to. And a couple of us were going to have lunch afterwards. And when I showed up, there were about 15 people there that had about this mission, that this vision that I had. I'm like, oh my gosh.
So this resonance really vibrated out right through.
It really did. And we were quickly able to secure a nonprofit partner stakeholder, which was very shocking to me. And again, to me, it was very divine. And so I started having individual conversations with these Black guys, and it just resonated, just absolutely resonated. And I built the organization backwards. Generally, you'd have your articles of incorporation and your bylaws and all that stuff, set before, before you assemble a board. But honestly, because I'm white, I couldn't do that. So I had to bring these Black friends together and build the organization backwards and upside down. And they poured a lot of their DNA into the organization itself. So what our mission is, and it's very unprecedented, in that we are looking to relationship in the African-American community and bring prevention and awareness through very fun events. And, there's places for conferences and, fireside chats and symposiums, but the way we really learn is hands-on and interactive. And so I snapped that, well, wait a minute, we need to break out of this echo chamber. And so we're building the organization to be an events-driven organization. And we have building relationships with stakeholders in the African American community. And so that's where we are. We're a little bit behind schedule because COVID happened, and then I got COVID. But I'm extremely excited about where this is going. And what I have been taught by these African American Black guys has been amazing. And I'm so thrilled to be working with them. And it was a little bit odd for me at first to be leading them. And, one of them sat me down and said, I am proud to be you leading us. And this is so God sanctioned, and we are going to do something about this, because what it comes down to is that we've got to save lives. And there are young Black girls and Black women who are not being served properly. And
so you recognize that some of the service components are there. However, there is that gap between them being able to access and understand, and then the resources there. But I got to ask you for a minute here, because I've joked with some of my team at D. Miller and Associates and our law firm that sometimes I feel, like I live in the Midwest. I grew up as a white woman, and I feel as if there are some things that, while I want to learn and understand, the braveness and the boldness of you to see the need and then to build relationships so that more relationships could be built and to be linked with these powerful men and women with this goal. I just that is the ultimate brave. And how did you step into that greatness of yourself?
Kicking and screaming.
Yeah. Kicking and screaming, huh? You said it was God sanctioned, so you felt the call, and you're
I felt the call, but I went kicking and screaming, and I did not want to do it. I'm going to be very transparent. But I knew that that's what my purpose for this season is.
Yeah. Because you had already become an expert at serving alongside and being with survivors. I shared a little bit while we lost your audio that you've been on the front lines. You have worked in critical care with law enforcement and first responders of all types of stakeholders to build those service responses and to make sure that the core competencies were there. And then you've relationshiped with survivors in life, helping them with all types of things and basic needs that you could provide, and then being their resource. I know that you've received calls in the middle of the night. You've done things. You've helped them with transportation, childcare, all the things. So with that experience, and then I also shared briefly about the work to found some really critical organizations in the Houston area. So with that knowledge and wisdom, you still felt like, wow, how do I apply all of that and then link to this new mission?
Right.
It's fascinating to me.
Yeah, it's I've had to really rely on, my relationship with God, and also the encouragement that I have gotten from my team, because, early in COVID, right before COVID hit, we had this big powwow plan, where people were flying in from all over the country. We were going to start strategizing this, and COVID hit. That got shut down. So in this time of quarantine, I was left with myself, and I was really scared, and I was scared because I was white, and that's as transparent as I can be. And I didn't understand. I knew I had this calling, and I was scared, absolutely scared. And my go-to is to take off. But I'm like, nope, I know what I'm supposed to be doing. So I call them the gents. And they have taken me and schooled me, and sometimes not so nicely, and have shown me and taught me how worthy I am, and that I have this power in me to do this, and this calling, and they're going along with me. I'm going along. We're hitched to one another. but Kim, it was a real time of introspection where I had to look at my own development as an impact of being white in this world. And I had to look at my own white privilege and really, really dig into what that meant. I got brought to the mat, and I wouldn't change it for the world. And that really added to my bravery.
Yes. And the richness of that learning opportunity and the willingness of these gents and all those in the group to come alongside and say, we're better together. We're smarter together than individually. That's what I kind of personally feel when I work in teams or groups. Like, and to be able to grow and learn. And I face some of those same issues during this, trying political time, trying cultural time, and trying to learn and trying to see where I can fit and do better and all of those things. But was such a grand call. And then you did share. So then you received the COVID diagnosis and with some other, health issues you'd had. And tell me that time of isolation. Do you mind sharing a few of those other things that kind of came out inspired in you during that time?
It was a very interesting time. It was 3 weeks. I was ill for 20 days, and I was completely isolated, trying to keep my husband from getting COVID, who he eventually contracted COVID, but thank goodness he had a very mild case. But, when you're left alone, you have a lot to think about. Mm-hmm. And I was afraid because it was it's such an unknown disease, and I had multiple sclerosis, and I really was very concerned about the impact that it could have on that. And I do very well with it, and so being left alone, I really hit an emotional low. I really did, and the isolation wasn't good for me. And then I learned that there was this one day that I woke up and I had absolutely no spark for anything. And it scared me, and it just prolonged for a few days. And I just had to keep reminding myself that I have a purpose and that this is temporary, hopefully, because I didn't know. And then I learned about COVID depression, and it's different than the depression that people are experiencing because of what's happened in these last 10 months. There's actually a physiological depression that comes with having COVID. And that's what I was experiencing. Mm-hmm. So I didn't give a whole lot of thought to Alive, except that there were moments that I thought about just throwing it all in and just forgetting it because I was sparkless. But last week or maybe a week before, I woke up and I'm like, I think I feel like myself again today, So that's, it was an emotional hit. So I didn't give a whole lot of thought to the mission, to be as honest as you can, but it gave me a new appreciation for life and, or a different appreciation. And so my motor has started up again. My pistons are starting to fire again, and I'm really excited about that. The excitement builds day by day.
What a beautiful message. And you touched on so many important things. I just want to recap really quick. First of all, acknowledging the real struggle and the truths about COVID and the way that it hits people and affects families and what it does mentally and physically as well. And also the fact that even throughout our lives of seeking help and being brave and strong, there are moments that come when we find ourselves in the wilderness again.
Yes.
And that is okay. We have to almost give ourselves permission to just slow down and stop, right? Because I think I hear you say that you were pouring out in a lot of ways, and it was almost a time to regroup and then get refilled, right?
Yes. Yes.
You said to me once that truth splinters, relationships and people. And so how was identifying the truths of what was going on for you right then? How was that with your relationships and life and family and colleagues and things? Do you mind sharing a little bit about that?
Yeah. Are you talking about the COVID time?
COVID, and then just also kind of overcoming some of the other things that you were choosing to address.
Yeah. Well, I told you earlier, that I came out of the womb a truth teller and a truth seeker, which has created some chasms between family members and friends. And I that's a hard question. That is so multi-layered. That is such a multi-layered question. I just had to, Kim, I just had to persevere.
Yes.
And
that's it. That's what I was sensing. I love that you found.
I just had to persevere and, walk through the times of wilderness and, knowing, but staying cognizant that I had a bigger purpose. Mm-hmm. And, I'm telling you, I had never experienced anything like having no spark and being afraid that it wasn't coming back. But I had to keep my eye on the truth. And that's what helped me. It absolutely helped me, is keeping my eye on the truth, knowing that this was probably not permanent. And even though I got so incredibly discouraged and scared, but and when I started coming back, I feel like I'm going to be even stronger. And I had a conversation last night that, because I'm such a go and get things done, and I experienced some reticence about, oh my gosh, how do I do this? Because there was this emotional hit. And so I had to stop and give myself permission to take things and do it chunk by chunk, instead of thinking that I have to do it all so quickly. And I realized that I was carrying this unnecessary responsibility for other people and involved with Alive. And that, I have a very transparent and good relationship with Ken Henry, who's been on Talk to Me Tuesday.
Yeah.
And he is, we have a very transparent relationship, and he's our operations director. And that has been so beneficial. And I was speaking with him early today, and I was honest with him about this responsibility that I feel, because, you moved across the country, but, he was planning, he goes, I was planning to do that anyway. Yeah, it got expedited, but he goes, let that go. And do exactly what you know to do, and trust the timing.
Mm-hmm. Trusting the time and letting go. These are like life lessons that I think somehow we feel when we've met certain benchmarks in life or achieved certain goals, whether it's career or family, but then we're like, what next? And when we feel like we lose that spark, it sounds like for you, that was again, fertilizing the incubation process of what's next. Yet we feel like we jump to the conclusion that, oh gosh, now I'm not okay anymore. I'm not worthy. I can't do this. We feed ourselves that negative language when, really we can't find solutions or happiness on that same frequency as that negative, self-talk and conversation with ourselves, right?
Yeah, there was a real freedom and liberation when I found out that there really was this thing called COVID depression, because I didn't understand what happened to me, and I didn't want it to happen again. And you're right, it was a very fertilizing moment for me. And earlier when we were talking about fertilization, and I flashed back to early on in my recovery. I was in group therapy, and the therapist asked a question, what you were grateful for. And I said, I'm grateful for the dysfunction in my family. And she admonished me for saying that. But I knew at that early time in my recovery that that was going to be my story, and that was, going to be part of what developed me into the human being that I am, which was going to translate into being of service to humans.
Oh, these are the moments I want to say, yes, amen. And I love to hear you say it. You were choosing to rewrite your story in that moment, knowing that you could rewrite the story. This had been your experience in your life, but from here forward, what you chose to do with it was really about your decision, and not that the wind and waves haven't come and won't still come. Right. But I heard you say once when you were sharing in an event, but about catching mental health, and it was like, I put that in perspective of this catching COVID and all this. I think you've really done a great job today explaining some of that depression with COVID that maybe people aren't
Yeah.
accepting, acknowledging. And so I really appreciate you, because I'm
Yeah.
hoping people that are experiencing it or have seen loved ones or friends go through that, there can be some permission and some
Yeah.
grace. But
Yeah.
the whole catching mental health thing, like, go into that. I love that phrase that you have.
Yeah, I did. I caught mental health.
Yeah.
And I didn't, I remember that conversation, and I didn't really have full conceptualization of what I meant at that time when I said that. But in retrospect, I did. I caught it. It's like I caught the zephyr, and I wrote it. And learning about your brain chemistry and what happens with our brains with trauma was part of that catching mental health.
Yeah, tell me a little bit
And
more about that if you don't mind. I'm
oh
fascinated.
yeah, well, you know, complex trauma changes your brain chemistry,
Mm.
and you know, I've gone through quite a bit of therapy, and when I actively work in human trafficking, I always have a therapist because it's such a dark area. And with my own abuse, I want to stay healthy. But I'm working with a trauma therapist that she's a somatic trauma therapist, so we really work with the body responses, and the body responses that actually remap the brain, what's the word, your brain map. And it's been an incredible journey because I have found myself doing such healthy and making healthy decisions. I'm like, where did that come from? And it's so different than cognitive behavioral therapy, which is important, but this is different. And it's restructuring my brain. It's healing that trauma.
Oh, the synapses of
Yes.
the
Yes.
rewiring. That's the word. It just came to me. I think you were seeking that, which is not a word I say every day. So the fact that you willed it to me, I got it. I caught it. But so the work around somatic healing, just to kind of explain that a little bit, it's integrating the mind and the body in the way that it responds to the triggers and memories. Is that correct? And
Yeah,
so
it's paying attention to the body.
Mhm.
And one of the most fantastic things that I learned was, with anxiety, we don't want to experience anxiety, so we try to chase it away. And what I learned is that no, we're supposed to be doing the opposite, or at least I am, and that is going into and embracing the anxiety and seeing what it, where it happens in my body, where it's being held,
Mm,
and giving it permission to be what it is.
mm.
And through this different way of therapy, if I get into some anxiety, I stop and I do my work, take my tools, and the next thing I know is that it's gone. That moment is gone, and I follow it across my body. But what it's doing is it's engaging the prefrontal cortex, your brain, the
Okay.
brain, the kind of
Release.
parental, the logical brain, because when you get caught in being triggered and getting into your ego states, you do go back very much to where the unfortunate things happen, in childhood, or even in adulthood. And my duty to myself is to parent myself, and that part of that parenting myself is to use my tools to get my brain, my logical brain back in charge, so I can parent that internal scared little girl.
Oh, Melinda, there is so many things I'm taking away from this. I hope that we can talk about this again, these experiences and things that you've learned through your journey to catch mental health. Because I'm thinking when you said the triggers and the anxiety that we feel, oftentimes we want to just find something to cope or to numb that.
Yeah.
So, that comes in a variety of ways, some healthy, some not. But you're saying to lean into it, to feel it, to try to put words to it so that your prefrontal cortex is allowing some of that to be released, right? And
Exactly.
wow.
And it's trying to identify what my body is feeling instead of trying to talk, to be logical. Get out of my logical brain for a minute
Ah,
and pay attention to my body
yeah.
and let it get back on, in balance together. And that's when I can kick in. And what I'm finding is that I'm setting much more healthy boundaries,
Mm.
and not so worried about being a people pleaser or being a bad person, because if abandonment is my chief issue, and woven in that abandonment is, am I bad or am I good?
Mm.
And that's something that I still got a little ways to go with, but I'm going, and it's
Yeah.
exciting.
Wow, you're stepping into that with bravery, like trying
Mhm.
to embrace it and say, what does this mean? And why do I feel this way? When you said the people pleaser thing, I really laughed because the words that were in my mind as I was hearing you was that sometimes I'll just hide all of those emotions and feelings because I just want to be okay to the people around. And so I don't let it show, or I'll go into like a deep retreat where I just kind of don't answer phone, text, calls, whatever. I'm just like, I shut down because I've just pushed myself too far rather
Yeah.
than processing some of that along the way. But I hear what you're saying a lot too with giving yourself permission to parent yourself. What a beautiful phrase, I think, for us as adults and those that have suffered trauma, even the external trauma that's been happening in our world that we are taking in, right? Do you feel like some of this is kind of entering our psyches and our
I
souls?
do. I do. I think that we are in a shift where, with the political culture and the social culture, because with with social media and social communication, our abilities to empathize have been diminished.
Mm.
And there's actually a study, I believe, don't quote me on this, I think it came out of the University of London a few years ago, that was, had researched the proliferation of digital communication and the reduction in the decreasing of empathy. And so I personally believe that we are craving authenticity. And that's what I'm seeing. Even with all of the digitization, I mean, we can take a picture and change how we look. We can take a picture and put ourselves in Tahiti, and we can create whatever life we want in digital form. But I think people are getting exhausted from that,
Wow.
and craving authenticity. And that's my word. That was my word of 2020 and 2019 and 2021 is and that's part of my journey, is to learn to be more authentic.
So I feel like I'm so blessed by this conversation today. So many things I learned, so many things I remembered that I maybe knew inside. And I'm like, I've forgotten that that is right and true for me. So how do you show up authentic in your relationships and transparent? And how do you work to do that? I know it's probably a process and a journey. And
It is a process.
Yeah.
And there are people like you that that you and I have this relationship where I can be very transparent with. And it's very important to be very prudent and mindful about who you're transparent with. There is some wisdom in that, because I have been very transparent where it's been turned around and weaponized on me. And that's not about me. But that doesn't debunk. I mean, not debunk. That's still very hurtful and scary. I'm comfortable. I'm comfortable being authentic. Now there are those moments where I'm not comfortable, and we all dissociate to an extent, and I'll dissociate right on out of there. And when that happens, my people pleasing will step in. But my goal is to be true, to be liberated, and to be true, and to be authentic.
What's just such beautiful words for liberated might be my word for 2021. I saw several little quizzes and ways to find your word, and I just haven't been able to settle on one, for 2021. I just keep thinking that I just want to remind myself that everything is happening for us, not against us, but for
Right.
us. These shifts and these changes, like, the paradigm shifts that have happened, even what you helped me with today. What is a paradigm shift that has come to you in the last, say, few months that just kind of knocked you upside the head, like, maybe something that you remembered that you knew before, like I said, but just a shift where you went, okay, got that.
I will tell you, when I identified that what is happening with a lot of people in our country and maybe even our world is that we are enmeshing our political ideologies with our personal identities.
Ooh,
And those two things
strong.
are never meant to enmesh. They can enhance one another.
Mhm.
And that, and I don't know if it's exactly a paradigm shift as much of a more of a realization, and it helps me understand what is happening. And
Mhm.
so it was a great epiphany to me because it
Mhm.
helps me understand the trauma that people are going through, and they don't know they have this trauma, and they don't know that they're enmeshing these two things, but it's a dangerous thing to do, and we're seeing it played out. But that's been the big thing for me for 2021 is realizing this is happening, and that people are scared of losing their identities, because we'll fight to the death to protect our identities.
Right. And since they're choosing or allowing that political identity or the cultural identities that are the norms now to permeate and become kind of aligned with what their personal identity is, that's what the danger zone. I
Mhm.
see that. That's really an epiphany to me. So I'm wondering if how do I see that? So if I say, for example, I have a friend or a neighbor or colleague that maybe I see that that's happening, or I wonder if it is. What do you think some good ways are to is that something that you kind of just say to someone like, hey, have you ever thought, or just for those listening, like this is going to be an epiphany for them too. So
I
how do
have. I
yeah.
have just said, talking with people, and I've said, well, what I identified and talk to professionals about. So it's not, I mean, I believe it was a divine epiphany for me. And then I'm like, okay, well, let me make sure that, I'm not crazy. And, but no, I've been direct with people like that before, but then I also know, or I try to be very discerning in when to deploy that and when not to deploy it,
Mhm.
because we do have a society and a culture that we're in trouble. When going back to the paradigm shift, I think that we are going to see a beautiful paradigm shift in our country with African American people, and I
Mhm.
think that we are moving into where they are coming into what they deserve, and what they deserve.
Yes.
And I'm so excited about that because they've got so much to teach us, and there's so much. And I hesitate to use the word dismantle, but I mean, I've had to be dismantled in a lot of ways, and culturally, and being white, you know, and there's nothing wrong with being white, I mean, I embrace being white, but, you know, I, I learned really what white privilege means. And I've been given this beautiful opportunity to be taught by these gents as well. But I'm hoping that our culture, um, as Rodney King said, why can't we just get along?
Yes. Yes. It seems so basic. I was speaking with my boss the other day, and we were kind of breaking things down, not too political, just like what is happening in our world. And we both kind of thought, where's common sense anymore? Where is common sense? And that makes me sad because I feel like people are so driven by not only emotions that are triggered now, but historical traumas
Yeah,
from
yeah,
their families and generational traumas, and driving people to make decisions that aren't sound and that aren't fair and that hurt people
yeah,
ultimately. And
yeah.
I love that you've talked about your faith and the divinity of the directions that you've been called to. And I know that you've recently been appointed to a really special organization around the faith community. So if I get it right, it's the National Black Faith Coalition. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's the national. They just kind of switched up their name. It's the
Okay.
National Coalition of Black Faith Leaders Against Human Trafficking.
Okay. Thank you.
And and I was asked to join, and which was a
Absolutely.
huge privilege. And as we build out Alive, we're going to be building out a Black coalition here in Houston,
Love
and
it.
that's going to be, I'm sure, is going to be part of the national coalition.
Mhm.
And because Kim, the reality is that human trafficking in the Black community is the Black community's, it needs to be healed by the Black community. And there are pockets across this country that are of Black organizations that are like, okay, enough is enough. So I'm really excited about what's coming.
I think there can be so much healing. I want to be a part of all of that with you. I know we do as well at the firm. This is so rich to hear again about the ebbs and flows. What I love about our conversation is not about a perfection in any certain area. It's about the process and the journey. And that's such a overquoted thing, but it truly is. And it goes back to, in my mind, the permission and the grace with which we deal with ourselves, and just allowing to be moved. And even in your time of surrender, how much more came to you during that time of fertilization. What would be one of the last amazing conversations, maybe even pre-COVID, that just lit you up, like that you just said, things are changing? Can you think of any one particular?
Yeah, it was when George Floyd was murdered. And, we all watched that play out. And the dialogue that started happening across the country and, was amazing. And that really sparked me. I'm like, let's not miss this opportunity. And this opportunity is not missed. And I'm very happy to say that. And so, yeah, as sad as that was, and I don't, and I know I just mentioned George Floyd, but all the other African Americans who have been unfairly mistreated and killed. I mean, it's a litany of names. I could go on and on and on and on.
Yes.
But yeah, that lit me up. It was like, all right, okay. Thank you. Thank you for letting me be part of this. Thank you, Lord, for piercing my heart. Thank you for giving me the knowledge that you've given me. And thank you for giving me these gems, and thank you for this organization. And I've laid it at the throne, and it's going to be what it's going to be. And we're just going to walk this thing out.
Wow. Piercing. I love that, to be able to think that things can get us in such a way where we want to know what we don't know, what we want to be better, where we want to grow, where we want to help, where we want to plant seeds of righteousness and health, and all those things that make our world better in the future. Because for such a time as this, here we are together. Wow. And as we honor the tragedy and what we know as sexual exploitation, right, we honor the efforts against that and stop it, and we honor the fact that people are rising up against some of these other disparaging things that have happened, these discrepancies in the way that we deal with each other, and the loving way as humankind that we can really see change. And
I believe that we were put here to fall in love with one another.
Yes.
And I'm hoping that with all the strife and the unfortunate things that have happened in this last year, well, no, for 400 years, let's just be straight, 401 years, I'm hoping that we are transitioning to a place where we understand the importance of falling in love with one another, no matter what religion you are, no matter what ethnicity you are, no matter what, because that's where we can be of service to one another.
Right. One last question. What is that key to love? Do we just have to get out of our own way? How do we?
It is. You hit the nail right on the head. It is getting out of our own way. For me, it's been healing and recognizing when I'm in my own way and being open to people telling me, hey, stop, But it is. It's getting out of our own way and being a service to one another. And it gets back to the golden rule. And that is that, to treat people like you want to be treated. Mm-hmm. I want to be loved and I want to be adored. And so I really strive to live authentically like that. And I'm not, I really do.
To love and adore each other. Well, I'll tell you, I love and adore you and our friendship and just the effort that you've put into this world to make it a better place. I've witnessed it for years, and I can't wait to see all that is to come with Alive and with your relationships with this incredible time of change. Melinda Metz, I am so proud to call myself your friend and thankful, and I just really appreciate what you've offered us today. So many insightful tidbits and takeaways, and I do hope that you'll join me again.
I would be so honored to do that. And I want to reciprocate and thank you for your friendship and thank you for the guidance that you have given me and the takeaways that you've given me today as well.
Well, this is a wonderful time when we can stop and reflect. And, this Brave Embrace platform that, D. Miller and Associates, PLLC, has given me to be able to bring these, stories of courage and bravery to life, to be able to share and offer hope. All of our stories are different, yet there's a thread of similarity that runs through it all. And what I hear is the wind and the waves and the ebbs and the flows. It's all part of it. It's all part of the process. We need to gather what we can from that time, harvest the good fruits, and keep moving towards change. Yes. Okay. Well, thanks for watching. Until next time, keep being brave, and we'll see you again soon.